almost everyone. Not yet. I see a couple of people sitting in the back. Test. We are going to do a little bit of exercise at the end of a very busy day. Let's try again. Raise your hand if you can hear me fine. Amazing. All good. So thank you for joining us here tonight at the Science for Climate Action Pavilion. First of all, let me thank WMO, Mary Foundation, and IPCC for hosting us tonight. My name is Paola Geremica. I work for the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, and I'm going to serve as your moderator here tonight. The reason why we're all here, because we have the pleasure to launch the global assessment of coral species done by IUCN. I still see people coming in. Just make sure you have your headset. All good? So we are officially launching this global coral update, and you will hear more from the panelists about the key outcomes of this global coral update. And without further ado, let me introduce the amazing panel, experts in the field and friends, I'm proud to say, one by one. It's a real honor for me to be the moderator of you all tonight. Let me invite you on stage Stuart McInnes, the Deputy Director General of IUCN. We have Beth Polidoro, who is online, connected via Zoom. She's the Associate Professor on Environmental Chemistry and Aquatic Conservation at the Arizona State University. That's the most difficult part for a moderator, getting the names and the job titles right. I hope I'm not going to make any mistakes in pronouncing your names. Beth, she's also the, how do we call them? The Red List Authority for the specialist group of coral at IUCN, and she's connected online. Welcome, Beth. We hope you can hear us fine and see us as well. I also take the opportunity to thank and welcome the participants online. This session is live streamed, so we have the pleasure of having some people connected online. After Beth, I have the pleasure to invite here on stage Daniela Picco. She's the Chief Executive Officer of MSC Foundation. MSC Foundation has been instrumental to allow us, thanks to their generous contribution, to perform and to finalize this global coral update, which happened this year after 14 years of not having refreshed the data we do have about coral. So this is really a big milestone we are here to celebrate with you. Then let me welcome on stage Nathalie Ilmy, Head of Environmental Economics at the Centre Scientifique de Monaco. Welcome, Nathalie. And last but not least, Cécile Saboureau, Vice President for International Affairs at the Université de Côte d'Azur. So the panelists are here on stage. Thank you very much. We are going to hear from them more about the coral update and more about the importance of healthy coral ecosystems and about the ecosystem services that those healthy coral reefs they bring with them. Let me start with Stuart, the DDG of IUCN. He's going to give us a short, you can put the slides on, please. Stuart is going to give us a short introduction about the IUCN Red List of Threatened Species, what makes it a true barometer of life, and what has been making the IUCN for the past 60 years and reference point for conservation action on the ground. He will then deep dive into the recently launched update, as I said before, and it's going to give us more insights about what this update revealed. I still can see oh, voila, we do have it. You can scroll down, please. Here you go. So over to you, Stuart.
Okay, thank you very much, Paola. Everybody can hear me okay? Right, great. So thank you. I will point to, sorry, Danielle. No, it's okay. I'm gonna, but I'm just because I want to highlight a couple of issues here. So thanks. Could I have the next slide, please? So the red list. It's the IUCN red list, but it's IUCN as a union. We are a fantastic partnership of multiple organizations. You can see them here who are committed to working through and doing the assessments. We have now assessed 166,000 species. That is about 8% of all described species, and it's thanks to all these organizations working together that they can actually drive what is the most authoritative information data set on conservation status of species globally. There is nothing else that is behind those 166,000 assessments, there's millions of data points. Next slide, please. And that work is all thanks to the wonderful volunteer scientists who are part of the Species Survival Commission. You can see here, I think there's over 120 specialist groups who actually work and do assessments and reassessments. And I am trying to find, can you see the corals? I saw it here somewhere. There. So this what we're going to report on today was done by this fantastic group here, the Coral Specialist Group, who have, I say, all made up of real experts in the field, all volunteer scientists working in this network, working with the partners. And this is what I think really makes IUCN special as a union, is that we can mobilize this and produce cutting edge, the high data and information of the highest quality, which then, as I will explain in 2 minutes, helps inform conservation action. As you know the old saying, you can't manage what you don't measure, but this actually gives us the insights of where we can respond and what we need to do to maintain the healthy and vibrant life on this planet. Next slide, please. So as I said, the red list, I'm sure you all know the red list, but it is, and I think this is important, it is an objective framework. There is a robust set of standards how red listing is actually done, and the different specialist groups work that through. They do assessments, classifying different taxonomic groups down at the species level and assessing the risk of extinction. And then they're able to categorize that to start to say how close a species may be to extinction. And this, I said, this really is the starting point for conservation action over decades now. Next slide, please. So, what we know at the minute, so as I said, we've now assessed 166,000 species. We know that 28% of them are threatened at some level with extinction, and all the major groups are represented there, and we've actually been working to make sure that we're increasing groups that were historically underrepresented, such as fungi and invertebrates. Next slide, please. So how do we apply the red list then? one way is actually to look at trends over time. And so here you can see this, and so this is called the Red List Index. And this can be cut, spliced and diced, as they say, in different ways. This here is looking at this from a regional perspective, and you can see that we can look at trends from 1993 to the present, and you can see just how much species or species groups are at risk. Now, one thing I want to say that is very relevant today, and please keep this in mind as when I start to outline the conclusions of the reassessment of corals, is that since we developed up the Red List Index, the taxonomic group that has declined most precipitously are corals. So I say, with the Red List Index, we can see trends in mammals, birds, invertebrates, etc. But the one that really is pointing downwards at a very alarming rate are coral species. Next slide, please. And it's not all just about assessing risks of extinction. It's also being able to advance species recovery. And I think that's an important thing to bear in mind, that with better information, we know where to target our efforts. We can track that in geographic locations, we can track that taxonomically, but it is also looking about how we can actually move things forward. And 2 weeks ago, I was in Cali, and we were presenting some of the work we had done with tiger and tiger conservation over the last 10 years. And just to give you an example, 100 years ago, there were 100,000 tigers in Asia. 10 years ago, there were 3,200. But because of directed conservation action informed by the Red List, that figure has increased by 40%. So we've seen a 40% rise. So this is not all. This is not about documenting extinction. This is about avoiding extinction by being able to direct and focus real good conservation action and be able to help and track that as we move forward. Can I have the next slide, please? Now, one thing is, we can assess something once, and Paolo, you did say, and I think this is another important point to highlight, we haven't done a reassessment of corals for 14 years. As we now move forward, to implement the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, we need to be reassessing more quickly. We need to have more real-time information, and that is why it is really valuable to have supporters like MSC, but to help us provide the resources so volunteer experts can do these assessments, and we can get more information out as a global public good for better decision making. So what's important, it's not just to be able to assess the status of a species or group of species once. We need to keep doing these reassessments, and in doing that, then we can then actually start to track, as say, we can look at where there's real issues like with freshwater fish, but we can also track the good news stories as well. Next slide, please. So now these are the results of the global coral reassessment, and again, I really want to acknowledge the work of the Coral Specialist Group, all those scientists. We're going to hear from some of them now, and the support we received from MSC. Without that contribution, none of this would be possible. We assessed almost 900 species of warm water reef building corals. Those are the coral species that you find in tropical waters. Sorry, going too fast. The threat to reef building corals has grown since they were last assessed. And as I said, remember what I said about the Red List Index? If it's up near 1, then it means that group is not really at risk. When we first did this around 1996, I think, the index was actually looked quite favourable. Since then it's actually, I say, it's declined quite precipitously. But now we actually, and at that stage, 1/3 of corals were threatened. With the reassessment, we now see that 44% of corals are now threatened with extinction. So I think that really should be raising the alarm bells that we haven't seen any diminishing on that rate of decrease. We see more and more corals at risk, moving from 1/3 to 44%. And again, I think this is a trend that we are seeing across all, and I should say the big thing here is what's driving that. One thing we can identify mainly is climate change. Not surprising, you hear in the news about bleaching events, etc. This is also, I'll also just highlight that this is showing, I think, a real crisis in our oceans. That it's not, IUCN also does, and I won't explain this today, but we've got a similar process for looking at ecosystems and trying to assess the risk of ecosystem collapse. Earlier this year we did an assessment on mangroves, and we've shown that 50% of mangrove ecosystems are at risk of collapse. Main driver, climate change. So I think this is really highlighting what the risks are facing marine ecosystems are and the species that dwell therein. Next slide, please. Of the species that were assessed at risk, most can be found in South and Southeast Asia, and followed by Oceania, Sub-Saharan Africa, East Asia, and West and Central Asia. We've also assessed reef building corals of 85 Atlantic coral reefs, and again those are showing the similar trends as well. Again, about 1/3 of Atlantic corals are considered as assessed as critically endangered. Next slide, please. And here's where you can see it. So to me, this is a real alarming trend. You can see the number of threatened coral species high in Oceania, Southeast Asia, along the East African coast, up into the Red Sea, and then, as I say, you can see that there are less. Remember, there are less species, but about a third of these are considered critically endangered in the Atlantic. Next slide, please. So, what do we do? Well, the main solution must be, and I think this is why are we presenting biodiversity data at a climate COP? Because I think the key lesson is the time for procrastination has gone. We now need to see a significant action on cutting greenhouse gases and the emissions. It is not just the warming. It's also the acidification as well, but we'll hear from our specialists on this in more detail. Over millions of years, coral reefs have built up as some of the most diverse of our marine ecosystems, and now with the sixth assessment of the IPPC, and I think we'll hear more about that, has actually highlighted if we overshoot 1.5, and remember this 2024 is probably the first year that we've actually had at least a temporary overshoot, but if we overshoot 1.5, we will see a significant number. I think it's 70% of 90 by the end of the century. Yeah, so I say this unfortunately, it'd be great to have good news stories like the Iberian lynx or the tiger, but this is not the case. There is a real risk to our marine ecosystems. They have been ignored for too long, and I think one of the things hopefully that we can do with the Red List is really put the spotlight on just how critical this situation is. Final slide, please. I said we've also assessed cold water reef species or coral species. Those live in much colder, deeper waters, so they don't depend on sunlight. They're less. You might think, well, okay, they're safer from warming and bleaching events, but they're not. We've actually that there are still threats there. Some of these include fishing, trawling, damage through deep sea deep sea mining. But again, even there in these cold, dark waters, climate change is still a real issue, coming from not so much from warming, but from acidification. But that's the overview. I think what we really want to do is hear from the real experts. And so with that, I will hand... Oh, sorry, there's one more thing. Oh, sorry, one more thing. Okay, last slide, please. Yes, very important. I would hope... I imagine most of you are familiar with the Red List. I imagine most of you use the Red List. But I would hope if you came in and you didn't really know that this story of what we've done with the coral reef reassessment highlights the fundamental importance that we need to be investing more and more in this here. We need to be supporting those 10,000 scientists who actually do this assessment. We need to have more regular assessments, and so we do need to raise the profile of the Red List, and we need to be able to mobilise resources so that we've got others joining the generosity of colleagues like the MSc Foundation. And so this year we are launching, the Red List is 60 years old, and we are launching a real, to profile and give more publicity to this, and with a real focus on iconic species. But I'm not going to steal Paula's fire because she's the genius behind that. So Paula, you're going to have a few words on that later on. Thank you very much. And again, I want a big thanks to our SSC specialist group and to our SSC scientists and to our donor in MSc. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stuart. We have now heard that the coral reef, they are at risk. We have an alarming 44% of reef-building coral species assessed as at risk of extinction. We have also heard that we have more than 340 species that are considered at risk. So it's not a percentage, it's 340. Just memorize this number. And what Stuart said is just never like now. It's time to act. Much work remains to be done, and we need to secure funds, and we need to make sure the science remains the basis for conservation action. I'm going to steal what you said. We cannot manage what you cannot measure. And the IUCN Red List of Threatened Species is really measuring the risk of extinction for taxonomic groups of species. On this note, I want to hand over to Beth, who's connected online. I hope everything is fine and that technology is helping us today. As I said before, she's the Red List Authority, and she is part of the SSC specialist group, which we probably haven't thanked enough for the amazing work of the scientists who most of the time they do this work on top of their normal work. So thank you very much also to the two people represented on the panel. Beth actively worked on this assessment. So Beth, if you hear us and see us.
Yes, I can.
Amazing.
Can you hear me okay?
Yep. Technology worked. Thank you. So can you please tell us more about the importance to assess and reassess species in order to better protect and restore the world's coral reefs and to mitigate and to remove the effects of climate change and human impact? So the floor is yours, Beth.
Great. Thank you so much for inviting me today. Yes, as Stuart and Paula mentioned, today we've announced that the global coral reef reassessments for species has been completed, with 44% now in elevated categories of threat. That would be species listed as vulnerable, endangered, or critically endangered on the IUCN Red List. This initiative took about 4 years, and the efforts of more than 150 scientists across the globe, representing almost 40 different countries. And as Stuart mentioned, the primary reasons that these coral species are at elevated risk of extinction is primarily due to sea surface temperature change. Increases in sea surface temperatures in combination with local threats like pollution, habitat loss, dynamite fishing, sedimentation from agricultural runoff, these already create a stressful environment for corals. That in combination with prolonged and more frequent increases in sea surface temperature has projected that the majority of the world's corals will start to experience what's called annual severe bleaching events. These are events that last 8 to 12 weeks where corals are exposed to higher temperatures and they bleach. And if this happens on a regular basis, they're not expected to be able to recover. So it's the projection of sea surface temperature changes in combination with local threats that has really put these coral species at an elevated risk of extinction in the next several decades. So this initiative really shows the importance of the Red List and be able to provide a very comprehensive baseline and regular updating on the status of these important species groups. And in this case, these habitat-forming, warm water, photosynthetic reef-building corals. Not only now do we have a complete picture of what's going on, but we also, through the Red List process, can better identify those species that are at highest risk of extinction and those geographic areas that are at highest risk proportionally of threatened species. And this will help us to better focus our conservation and restoration efforts. Through this process, we've been able to identify those coral species that may be best candidates for restoration, as they may be slightly more resilient. Or we may be able to identify also those species and geographic regions that need immediate conservation action. Through this process, we've also identified additional research priorities. For example, in some parts of the world, we have seen a little bit of adaptation. In places in the South Pacific, such as in American Samoa, there are a few rays of hope. There are a few coral species that have been shown to be adaptive to higher temperatures. These are few and far between. But this leads us to the need for more research and more science to better understand how corals might be able to adapt. Not all of them, but at least some of them, to rising sea surface temperatures. And I think the next steps for us as a group are to extend these analyses to start looking at more marine species risk assessments, such as marine fishes, and also to continue to assess ecosystems, coral reef ecosystems, complete ecosystems for the red listed ecosystems and for the impacts of threats and climate change on those important habitats.
Thank you very much, Beth. You put it really in a very clear way. We have a picture now, but it's the picture of today. We have a fairly good understanding of species, coral species at elevated risk of extinction. We can take the avenue of setting up conservation action on the ground. On top, we need to continue to assess, reassess, move at ecosystem level. When my kids, they ask me, Mom, what's the difference in between the red list of species and the red list of ecosystems? I always explain that, giving the example of coral reef. They are really the home of many species, and this forms the ecosystem. So it's important we fuel resources into these two very important knowledge products of IUCN, which are public good, meaning everyone can access those data. I was impressed to hear, for example, the number of clicks the IUCN redlist.org website receives every day. It means that data, they are used for research purposes, for conservation purposes by government, organizations who work on the ground, and we need to continue to provide actual data, because all data, they don't serve much. They are not useful enough. So this is the constant update that the specialist group, they do all the time. On this note, I want to hand over now to Daniela Picco, the CEO of the MSC Foundation. You have heard their name many times, and you have heard us thanking MSC Foundation for this amazing initiative. Daniela, she's going to tell us why they decided to support the red list. Why corals? And she's going to take us to Bahamas. Thank you, Daniela.
Thank you, Paola, for the introduction. Good afternoon to everybody. Edward, congratulations for the work that you have done, and for it was really incredible because we met in 2023. We decided to do this, and today we are launching the project. I think that you and the team of experts has done an incredible job in such a short time. So, great achievement. The data, the 44% is really worrying, and yes, I would like to share today which is our priorities, what we are doing for coral conservation. That is one of the main focus of the MSC Foundation. So, first, we have 3 strategies. The first is to support ocean science. As mentioned, can you hear me? It's okay? Yes. We support ocean science, and yes, because we really think that have data is key to take the right decision and to set up the right strategies, and also to share the findings with the common data. So this is for us one of the key strategy, one of our key action, concrete action to protect the marine environment and the coral restoration. Second, we do raising awareness of this important topic of the education on marine education and coral protection. And the third is action on the field. We are building a marine conservation center where we are going to do researches, when we are going to do coral protection and coral restoration. But before going more in depth with point number 2 and number 3, I would like to let you know about the MSC Foundation. The MSC Foundation is the corporate foundation of the MSC Group. The MSC Group is the world leader in transportation and logistics, and we have offices around the world in more than 155 countries, and we have also cruises division with more than 25 ships sailing around the world. It's a family company, it's a family foundation, so there is a long-term vision, there is a capability to take decision in a very fast way, there is a global reach, and there is an expertise related to the sea. This is why when I tell you that we do awareness, raising awareness, it means that every year we can reach out to more than 4 million of cruises passengers, because we do a lot of education activities. We provide a lot of videos, also thanks to IUCN, lectures. We have onboard edutainment for families, kids and teenagers. So we really reach out a lot of people every year. We also reach out people at school, so we do a lot in terms of education. As a third point, there is our Bahamas project. So we concretely are building a conservation center. We have nurseries. As you can see, we are looking to find the genotype of the coral that is resistant to the climate change. And this for us, the IUCN assessment for us is vital, because we know that you study also one of the genotype that we are looking at. And to set the right priorities. Also, it's very important the fact that you find out the different depth of the corals. We have a partnership with 4 universities. We have, if you can go the other slide, yes. This is the rendering of the Marine Conservation Center. We will have tanks, pavilion, research, biologists, analysis. It will be ready in April 2025. And so this is our contribution to the coral restoration. So to conclude, one is to support ocean science to take the right decision and the right priorities. Second is education, raising awareness on the urgent need to protect the corals and to have a collective actions. Third, action in the field. So I think that, thank you, and I'm available for any question, if any. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Daniela. And you deserve this round of applause for the contribution, but also for the mindset, for considering the ocean your main asset class in your business. And I think this is important to underscore. Even for the business sector, nature has a value. And nature is the asset class to continue to run their business. And I had the pleasure to exchange with you all in MSc Group, Foundation. I really appreciate the vision of the family. I remember when I first met with the chairman, he said something along the line, I need to protect the ocean, not only for my family business, but I need to protect the ocean for my children and for my grandchildren. And I think this is a source of inspiration from a company like this. Thank you for taking us to Bahamas. We all look forward to coming and seeing the Conservation Center in April 2025. Mark the date and book an MSc cruise. That's the only way to get there, I guess. And now let's go to the Red Sea with Natalie. She's gonna refer to the Red Sea coral ecosystem, which is a crucial ecosystem in danger. Natalie, help us to understand why it is crucial to safeguard these unique and diverse reefs, and what is the value that they bring to the economy and to the human well-being. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to this session. And for us in the Monaco Scientific Centers, corals are very important. We have two teams of scientists working on corals and coral reefs, and I'm an economist, so my presentation is more about ecosystem services, but we are very close to corals. We have a very nice aquarium. If you come to Monaco, please visit us. My next slide, please. I want to explain about with the Red Sea why coral reefs are very important. Coral reefs harbor an impressive 1/4 of marine biodiversity, despite occupying merely 1% of the ocean. In the Red Sea, next slide, please. In the Red Sea, the corals are in good health, but they are also threatened by climate change, but also by other human activities. Next slide, please. When we talk about ecosystem services, it is the services that the ecosystems are rendering to the humanity, meaning that if we protect the coral reefs, we protect our well-being as a human as well. And we can consider coral reefs like natural capital. And when we talk about natural capital, it is along what is built capital that can be measured by GDP, for example, but also human capital. And coral reefs have a value for all those together. Next slide, please. We have several ecosystem services that are related to coral reefs. I'm going to present them one after another. Next slide, please. But also, I want to highlight that the human settlement and coastal development is threatening coral reefs, because we talk a lot about climate change, warming, ocean acidification, but also the economic activity on the coast is threatening what is happening in the ocean and what is happening for coral reefs. Next slide, please. For fisheries, it is an economic sector which is very important for several countries. Even in Saudi Arabia, we see that reef fisheries is accounting for about 75% of the country's total fishery landings, meaning that coral reefs have a very important value as a fisheries as well. Next slide, please. For coastal and marine tourism, we know that marine tourism is impacting coral reefs because the divers go and sometimes they take the corals from the sea, and so this is why education that you mentioned is very important. And the valuation of the coastal tourism include, of course, the role of coral reefs. I will show you more later. Coral reefs are also important for coastal protections, and if we consider reefs as a nature-based management solution, it can prevent the high cost of and environmental damage associated with beach replenishment and engineered structures, and I think this can be also be done in Bahamas and everywhere. Next slide, please. Coral reefs are very important supra-organism, meaning that they are source of cosmetic and crucial pharmaceutical compounds, and this is why we still don't know what kind of products we can still find in the coral reefs. We can find a lot of drugs for our health. We can find plenty of products that are very important for us as human beings. Next slide, please. And also the corals have what we call iconic value. This word is new. It has been used recently. Before we were talking more about cultural ecosystem services, but now we talk about iconic value. And this is very important because it means it takes the value that local communities are giving to the ecosystems. Next slide, please. So it is very important to protect those ecosystem services, and when we tell the policymakers that corals have a value, they say, okay, what kind of value? And when we give them a monetary value, they want to protect them more. And also the ecosystem services valuation can be used to create what we call now the biodiversity credits, and we can take them to the financial markets, to the nature markets, and this is why it is very important to evaluate the economic benefits. Next slide, please. Just to give you some examples how we can evaluate those ecosystem services. Of course, I don't want to enter in all the details, but we have the methodology to evaluate all those ecosystem services, so it is possible to do it. Next slide, please. And when we have those ecosystem services as evaluation, we can explain to the investors why they should invest to the protection, the conservation of those ecosystem services. Next slide. And in investing in climate mitigation and nature-based solutions is crucial to staying within 1.5 degrees Celsius warming thresholds. This includes not only the Paris Accord, but also the Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. So it is very important to incorporate all the ESG criteria into financial services to drive the economy resilience and sustainable development. Next slide. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Natalie. And it's brilliant to have an economist in this panel, because she's been raising super well that species and ecosystem, they do have a value that we cannot destroy, because there's no economic paradigm that is destroying assets. We cannot do that. And I really appreciated you touching upon iconic value, because iconic is what you are going to hear later on in a minute when we will reveal again the 60th anniversary campaign for the Red List. So thank you very much. Thank you very much for stressing the point about ecosystem services. And I noted down your definition. I'm going to quote you. It's just services that ecosystems are giving to the human beings. Services to us as human beings living on this planet. So there's no doubt that ecosystem services, they are important, but also dynamics and what happens on the coral reefs under the water is as important as the services they provide us. So I want to hand over now to Cécile, who's going to tell us more about what happens on the coral reefs. I'm simplifying, I'm not a scientist. And I mean, despite I try and learn from this kind of brilliant experts, I will never get there. So over to you, I won't give you more details. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. So may I have the next slide, please? Yeah. So I would like to present you what is the biology of coral reefs and corals. And so this is the pictures of healthy coral states. And you can see in this reef that you have different species. So we were talking about coral reef species, but you also have other species. So you have invertebrates, you have microbes also, you have fishes and plants and algae, and all these species are living together. And you can see here also, if you increase the view, you can see inside the corals what we call the polyps. And in fact, most of corals, they are symbiotic corals, they are symbiotic species, and they host inside their cells, they host microalgae. So they live in symbiosis with microalgae, and these little things here, the microalgae, they are doing photosynthesis. So that means that you have microalgae that are doing photosynthesis inside the cells of an animal, of a coral, okay? And this is providing nutrient for the coral. And if the coral lost the symbionts, the microalgae, then it will what we call bleached. You will see just after. And most of the bleached coral, then they will die. So it's really crucial for them to maintain this symbiosis. And we know that if there is an increase in seawater temperature, then it will collapse the symbiosis and collapse the whole ecosystem. And you have here a very nice picture of the Great Barrier Reef, and you can see that you have very diverse corals, and they all participate to the coral reef ecosystem. So all species are really important. And as Natalie already mentioned, and Beth also, the coral reefs occupy only a small percentage of world's ocean areas, but they provide habitat for more than 25% of marine species. So it's a really important ecosystem. They are essential also for the whole coral reef food web. Next slide, please. They also, we already mentioned that with Natalie, they provide also essential ecosystem services. For example, for coastal protection, they are what we call engineering species. They are hard corals, okay? So they protect coastal areas from, for example, erosion, but also from storms, waves, and so on. And they provide, of course, food security and economic stability if we talk about small-scale fisheries, because they are habitat for a lot of marine species, fishes and invertebrates that we can eat, and fish. And they also are really important for tourism, sustainable tourism and recreation, for example, scuba diving, snorkeling, and so on, and they have an iconic cultural value. Next slide, please. And the problem is that we know that they are threatened by a lot of things, and the primary one is increasing sea temperature. And they are some of them, or a lot of them, are very sensible to climate change and sea temperature rise. And one important thing, so for climate change, we talk about the raising of 1.5 terrestrial temperature, but if you, in some areas, tropical areas, if you increase the sea temperature from 1.5 degree, this will induce the bleaching here of 70 to 90% of corals. So that means that between 70 and 90% of coral species will die, of specimen, but then coral will die and then the species will disappear, maybe. But the hope is that some species are more resistant from others, and Beth already mentioned this important thing. And the key for resilience is to maintain the biodiversity. So that means in the assemblage of coral reefs, you always, or we hope that we always will have some resilient species. And then from starting from these resistant or resilient species, we can maybe do some restoration programs, thanks to MSC, for example, Foundation. And then we will be able to restore and to protect marine ecosystems and coral reef ecosystems. So this is a big hope, of course. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Cécile, for closing with these words of hope. Now it's time to ask questions to the panelists. Please raise your... That was fast.
Thank you very much. My question is about the pollution aspect. It's just following a discussion I had last week. There was a panel of companies from the chemical industry. So obviously we know oxybenzone, for example, is very guilty of destroying our corals. And there are safer alternatives, of course. So I said to them, and this was, my discussion was beyond corals as well, corals, but many other things to do with ocean pollution, particularly those affecting the sea surface microlayer, etc. And why they don't move away, really, as a group, to say, look, to level the playing field in terms of competition, that's their concern always. And they basically said, well, you know, it's of course, they always claim that they need more studies, etc. I think we know enough, to be honest. So they then said, look, if this stuff was regulated, we'd react. However, I did point out that they're constantly lobbying against regulation. So, and this goes beyond, as in coral, but pollution in general. And, you know, how do we break out of that cycle where we know things are bad, but we're stuck in this loop? You know, is it not time to really pull out the precautionary principle in a lot of these matters and break that commercial, those chains, basically? What's your thoughts on that, and how do we deal with it?
Thank you very much. Anyone who would like to start addressing the gentleman's question? Stuart.
So I think actually you raised a really good point, and this is where I think the science that we generate is absolutely important. To me, a lot of this comes down actually to better regulation, and yet the ones who lobby against regulation, when they comes, everybody says, yeah, we're happy, regulation levels the playing field, whatnot, and then there's always lobbying against that. We say that now, but I do think actually one of the areas of hope is I do think governments are now standing up. I think we're starting to see more regulatory frameworks coming in place. I think the other part of that regulation has got to have companies disclose what their impacts are. I think that's the first step, and that's why I do think some of the efforts around TNFD are actually quite important. You've got to be able to say what to actually account for what the impacts are. One thing that's important though in that disclosure is that it's got to deal with living nature, with biodiversity. It's got to deal with species and ecosystems. It's not just good enough to say about an extent of area or a bit of pollution. It has got to come down to actually to being able to document what the impacts are on living nature, on species and ecosystems, and that's got to be disclosed. And then as a basis of that disclosure, one actually hopes that the next step is then that actually starts to go into reporting. it then becomes actually a real issue of materiality for some of those companies, because then investors may have a choice to say, well, do we want to invest in X that doesn't look at this, or Y who's actually taking some of these issues seriously. So I do think, as I say, I do think that this is where the data and the knowledge that is generated by our colleagues like Natalie and Cecile and the colleagues in the SSC is really important. That has to be made available so that we can actually then be part of to actually push companies to disclose and report. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Stuart. I give the floor to Natalie, and then there's Beth online who would like to address the point. That was very popular, your question. Thank you.
Thank you. I can just add something maybe from the economic point of view. We can, if we want to depollute, it will cost. But if we show that the value of the ecosystem services are higher than the cost of the depollution, so people will say, okay, we will protect the nature and we will try to not pollute it. And yeah, so maybe I let that.
Thank you. We let Beth in.
Actually, I was going to say something very similar to Natalie, that the impact, disclosing the impacts is really important, but then putting a value on those impacts in terms of economic or health value, I think is a really powerful way to show what we could be losing, what we are losing from pollution.
Thank you. Do you have any other questions? Is there someone else in the room who would like to take this opportunity to ask questions to the panel?
Yeah, maybe my question is for the economic aspects. You passed really fast, Natalie, on how we actually value this fantastic opportunity that corals provide to society. So can you say a little bit more, like how do we put a price tag to corals?
Thank you. In fact, to evaluate the coral reefs ecosystem services, we cannot do it the same way for each ecosystem service. We have different methodologies, and IPBS has a very nice report on the value of nature, and you can see in this report that we have all the methodology already there. We just have to apply it to the different ecosystem services of each ecosystem. For example, I'm working on coral reefs, of course, but also on mangroves, and we can give them a value. For example, the iconic value, we can display survey, so we can have the value from the local and the indigenous people, because this is another way to see the nature. It is not only a market value.
Now, in the interest of time, I would like to close this panel before then revealing the surprise. So thank you very much. We have heard very interesting things. We started with the data that the Global Coral Assessment has given us. 44% of coral species that are at serious, elevated risk of extinction. 342 little corals living in the ocean. There's hope. But there's also a market value, which is an important trigger of conservation. We said that we cannot measure what we cannot manage, what we cannot measure, but we cannot give away what has a value. There's no way in a world based on finance, economics, with scientists, governments, civil society looking at it, there's no way, and there are methodologies to give a price tag. I love the definition of price tag, actually, to ecosystems, being them mangroves, being them corals, being them, I don't know, ocean, other things like that. So before we close, let me reinstate the importance of the IUCN Red List of Threatened Species and the importance, more than ever, to accelerate action, to accelerate resource mobilization. And I always say, as a resource mobilization practitioner, that you first raise awareness and you then mobilize resources. This is why, Stuart alluded to that, this year the Red List is turning 60, so the IUCN and the Red List partners have decided to launch a global social media campaign. We launched that in Cali on the 28th of October. It was a true success. The campaign is getting traction. For the one of you were around on the 11th of November, you must have seen a bus at the China Pavilion. And I see here in the room Sabrina Peng, Chief Sustainability Officer of Van Group, Portia and Zidane are incredible team members. These guys, they decided to lend their platform, Alipay and Ant Forest section of it, to the Red List. So thank you so much. Thank you for helping us to amplify the campaign. I think I've asked the question 25 times. I heard an incredible number. In 4 days, through the platform, IUCN and Ant Group, we were able to reach out to 15 million people, which is a number I still struggle to pronounce. So this deserves a round of applause, please. Also, thank you to the other partners, including MSC, who have given us their social media channels just to talk about the campaign, to speak with the people, to let them know that species are important and that the Red List is the only way we do have to measure presence, absence, threats to species around the world. I want to leave you with an inspiring, let's say, message. And it's not going to be me conveying this message, but it's going to be a group of amazing supporters that have decided to lend us their voice. They are key opinion leaders. You will recognize them in a minute. So they've decided to help us to raise awareness and raise funds for the Red List. Can you please show the video? I knew that this would have happened. We will need the sound. Maybe.
Hello, this is Jane Goodall. The number of species listed as in danger of extinction, some critically endangered, is growing.
And with them, the delicate balance of biodiversity that sustains all life. But there is hope. The IUCN Red List stands as a vital tool, providing science-driven data that helps us understand the state of our natural world.
It's the most complete source of information on the state of health of the plant and animal species of our planet.
My name is Pierfrancesco Vago, and I'm here today to say why we support the IUCN Red List.
I support the IUCN Red List because it has a concrete impact on species survival.
Because the Red List is a chronicle of biodiversity, and biodiversity is essential for the health of the planet.
It guides us in making science-based decisions that directly contribute to preserving our blue planet and its threatened species.
It tells us where we must take urgent action to save those species before it's too late.
Porque entendemos que la naturaleza es nuestra casa y es el tesoro más valioso que tenemos para la vida. Es la vida.
It is our best healthcare provider for the planet.
Thanks to its work, many species have been saved from the brink of extinction.
Similarly, collaboration enhances our ability to protect the planet. In celebrating 60 years with a new campaign to raise awareness and funds for endangered species.
This isn't just about nature. Protecting biodiversity is protecting our future.
The Red List is vital for conservation. We must protect iconic species we share the planet with.
Please support the Red List.
Es hora de actuar y no existe otra forma de alcanzar las metas 2030 sin la participación de todos los sectores y agentes de toda la sociedad.
Happy 60th anniversary to the IUCN Red List.
Thank you, everyone. Nothing else to add. I think they said it all. Thank you for coming here. Enjoy the rest of the evening and enjoy the rest of this COP. Thank you.